Welcome back to the Happy Pharm Life podcast. My name is Sierra Richard. I am a clinical pharmacist, and today I am talking about what is happening in pharmacy today and the actions that are being taken that might change the future of the pharmacy profession. We are currently in a crossroads within community pharmacy where there are pharmacists who have decided to take the path less traveled, a path that has been discussed but never taken in the past. And it is opening an opportunity for that to happen even more. On the other crossroad is continuing with the status quo and seeing where that takes us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to this crossroads, what exactly triggered some of the thoughts that are running through my head right now as I decide to record this episode, and just give you a little bit of insight in what it's like in a retail or community pharmacy right now. So let's do a quick history lesson. One of the big discussion points right now is within chain pharmacies. So your CVS and Walgreens are your primary two, but also grocery store pharmacies, things like Kroger, Albertsons, Hy-Vee. So if you go back to where these began, Walgreens was the first one to come about in 1901. And it was a single pharmacy that was bought out by somebody with the last name Walgreens. And it wasn't until 1909 that a second location opened. But slowly over time, that began to snowball and more pharmacies opened up within the chain. In 1967, you saw the first pharmacy go inside a CVS. CVS stores were open prior to that, but it was the first one to really open up a pharmacy in their location, and they were more of a grocery store at the time. Around the same time, in 1968, the first pharmacy benefit manager came about. If you do not know what a pharmacy benefit manager is, or a PBM, they're often considered the middlemen of insurance companies, drug manufacturers, and pharmacies. However, that's not their initial use. In the 1960s, they were used to process insurance claims. We're going to talk a little bit more about the role they play in all of the things that they do now, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So even around this time, as PBMs were rising and we were seeing some of these chain drugstores pop up, it wasn't out of the norm to see a neighborhood pharmacy. They were still what you went to most, a neighborhood community pharmacy, independent pharmacies, or small chains that were mostly owned by families or groups that had partnered together. When we really saw the biggest boom in big chain pharmacies was between 1980 and 2000. This is when you saw the rapid expansion of Walgreens and CVS, where now you can find one on pretty much every corner. If you go to a major city, or even in smaller cities, they started to pop up, and you started to see some of your Walmart pharmacies come up and superstores open up, and pharmacies started popping up everywhere. As these big chains expanded, we saw a lesser number of those smaller pharmacies or independent pharmacies keeping their doors open. They were starting to get pushed out by these larger corporations. And in 2012, we saw the largest spike in the number of pharmacists that were employed by these big box stores. And that was a trend that had been increasing over time before that was reached. And because that trend was increasing and there was a demand for pharmacists, they were saying there's just pharmacist shortage. We need more pharmacists. We need more pharmacists. A ton of pharmacy schools open up. We're talking like triple the number of pharmacy schools across the country opened up during this time frame. And not only that, the pharmacy schools that were open started expanding the number of seats they offered, and you started seeing a ton of pharmacy graduates, which ended up saturating the market. By the late 1980s, pharmacy benefit managers had really drastically changed their role and expanded more into what it does today. They started developing and managing pharmacy networks. They were involved in prior authorizations and determining what the criteria were for that to be met. They were the ones setting drug formularies for insurance companies. They were the ones determining patient copays, as well as what pharmacies they were going to work with and actually cover patient medications at, which ultimately determined where patients could go for their pharmacy needs and what pharmacies that they could use in order to even use their pharmacy coverage. This rise in the PBMs and the role that they played within pharmacy led to a decrease in pharmacy reimbursements, and oftentimes pharmacies not being able to make ends meet because they were losing money filling prescriptions. At the same time, patients' medication fees went up, and they were spending more and more on their medications despite the so-called negotiations with the drug manufacturers and the savings that they were supposedly negotiating. Not surprisingly, during this time, you could see the profits in pharmacy benefit managers increase. As you can imagine, all of these changes made it harder for pharmacies to keep their doors open if they were not affiliated with one of these large chains, so those smaller independent pharmacies, and they needed another way to make revenue. One of those opportunities came in the late 1990s as pharmacists started to immunize. There were more opportunities for revenue by giving vaccinations, which ultimately did increase revenue, but it also increased the workload for the pharmacist. As word got out and demand for pharmacists to give vaccination increased, it also became a metric at many of these chain retail locations in an area that was marketed to patients as a service that they needed and was really pushed on patients in order to drive even more revenue. These immunization efforts, while they have been great for public health, did fall onto the pharmacist that was already verifying orders, was trying to counsel patients, doing medication therapy management, among other tasks. Over time, we just continued to see the workload for pharmacists increase as the demand increased, but staffing did not. And technology started to come into play where there were more and more pieces of oversight that required a pharmacist attention, such as prescription drug monitoring programs. During the 2010s, we really saw an increase in the concerns for patient safety because of the work conditions that were there for pharmacists, where pharmacists weren't getting a lunch break and pharmacists weren't able to even go to the bathroom, and they were asked to do 12-hour shifts, sometimes without the support of a pharmacy technician or other pharmacist. And if they did have a pharmacy technician, the pharmacist still wasn't allowed to have breaks, because if they left, then the pharmacy would have to close, and the pharmacies didn't want that. Overall, the work environment was very difficult. So when the pandemic did hit, everything that was happening in these retail or community pharmacies just escalated. The safety concerns went up. There were more demands, especially once the COVID vaccine came out. And there were just a lot of difficulties, especially with staffing, as there was a major pharmacy technician shortage, and everything just kind of toppled at once. Now, I know pharmacy is not the only industry that this happened to, but it was a very difficult time because there were pharmacists who were on the front lines who experienced their own health concerns that were also trying to take care of patients. And these work conditions made it very hard and honestly very unsafe to fill prescriptions in many cases, because metrics were still being pushed, vaccinations were still needing to be done, and sometimes appointments being scheduled every 15 minutes while you're the only pharmacist there. On top of all of the prescriptions that need to be filled, there's probably a drive-through, there's a line out the door, people want to talk to you, ask questions, you have a physician on the phone, and you can understand where that could be a little bit stressful. As you may imagine, the people who were near retirement decided that they would just retire early because they were done. They didn't want to deal with these work conditions anymore. There were also people who just decided to leave their profession entirely because they just did not want that life for themselves. And so between 2019 and 2021, there was a 6% decrease in the number of pharmacists who were actually practicing. Not only that, in late 2021, there were a lot of discussions happening around pharmacy work conditions in the public. Not only was it appearing in mainstream media, but also all over social media under a couple of different hashtags. The first one was sparked in September of 2021 when a pharmacist who was working at CVS said she felt ill, was asking for a pharmacist to come and relieve her. After asking to leave before the relief person showed up, she was threatened with job abandonment. Unfortunately, she passed away from a heart attack. This very, very unfortunate event triggered the hashtag shewaited in a conversation on social media about the workplace conditions for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians across the country. Not only were these people expressing their displeasure with the pharmacy and how they handled the situation, but also started sharing their experiences and the workplace conditions that they had in their pharmacy when they may not have felt empowered to share that before. Another hashtag also popped up around this time. It was a little bit later in that fall of 2021, which was hashtag pizzaisnotworking. This movement also gained a lot of media attention as pharmacists and pharmacy technicians said that they were tired of being given pizza parties to try to make up for short staffing and not meeting the safety standards that were necessary to keep a pharmacy running safely. Another piece of this movement was asking for better pharmacy technician wages. This has been a big point of contention, especially as it is very prevalent that we have a pharmacy technician shortage. Pharmacy technicians are entry-level positions. However, there are more opportunities now than ever for advancement within a pharmacy technician career through additional certifications and jobs that allow them to use a different set of skills at a higher level after getting some basic experience. Unfortunately, the pay for many pharmacy technicians is less than ideal, especially for somebody who is dealing with medications, and the decisions they make and the possible errors they make could have life-threatening consequences. As a pharmacist, I will always support better technician pay. I can tell you with absolute certainty that a good technician makes me a better pharmacist, allows me to work as a better pharmacist. And if you do not pay those technicians well, they will go elsewhere to some place where they can get paid better. Because ultimately, I know the technicians that I work with care about our patients and they know the importance of what we do. But if they cannot pay the bills and they cannot put food on their table for their families and their kids or pay their rent, they're not going to stay in that job. And unfortunately, there are a lot of pharmacy technicians out there that are living paycheck to paycheck or can find jobs almost anywhere else that pay better than their pharmacy technician job. And so that's led to a pharmacy technician shortage. So during that #PizzaIsnotworking movement, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of increasing pharmacy technician pay and advancement for pharmacy technician positions. Also during this time, there were some grumbles of unionization and there was some talk about walkouts, but nothing really came to fruition at that time. And some have said that these movements were very beneficial or saw some traction because there were pharmacy technicians that did get increased pay. Some places decided to implement that. CVS in February of 2022 implemented a lunch break for their pharmacists where they closed their pharmacy for 30 minutes. This followed Walgreens that said that they were doing this in 2020. However, I know from pharmacists that do work there that not every location really enforced that rule. But overall, there were several people who expressed online that this was a step in the right direction. They were happy that some change happened, which is better than nothing at all. However, despite these changes, a lot of things didn't change. The long working hours didn't change. The metrics that were required to be hit for prescriptions that needed to be filled and how quickly they needed to be filled and how long somebody could be waiting and how many vaccinations needed to happen and how many people you needed to sign up for a membership for their prescriptions or a credit card, or all of these things started coming out where there were more and more tasks for pharmacists. There were less pharmacy technicians to support the pharmacists that were there, and there were fewer pharmacists that were being staffed. Right now, there are certain pharmacy locations that aren't even giving pharmacists full-time hours, or their full-time pharmacists are working 32 hours, and they're trying to just cut back as much as possible on pharmacist staff. You're trying to answer phone calls, you're trying to counsel patients and answer their questions, and you're trying to get all of these tasks done, and heaven forbid you make a mistake. And before I move on, I want to bring this up because you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to have to live with that. But unfortunately, if you're in one of these roles, that may happen. And so I want to encourage any new pharmacists or pharmacists that are getting ready to graduate that you need your own professional liability insurance. If you don't have that, I'm just going to get on my soapbox real quick and just say you need to protect yourself. It is a mistake that I've seen pharmacists make where they don't get their own insurance because the company or organization they work for has it. And let me tell you, you will be shocked at what is and is not covered under those policies. So you want to get your own. This is a mistake that you do not want to make. It is on a list of 5 mistakes that I do not want pharmacists to make. And so you can grab that list and how to avoid them. I break down some things to consider when you're getting liability insurance or managing your CE hours. And so you can get that at happypharmlife.com/mistakes. I created that because I saw too many pharmacists make these mistakes and it can financially ruin you. You can lose your license. You don't want that to happen to you. Trust me, you have worked too hard for this. And now let's talk about what's going on today. I'm recording this in fall of 2023, and right now there are less and less independent pharmacies that are able to stay open every single day. Pharmacy benefit managers are bringing in billions and billions of dollars. CVS has their own PBM that is making so much money. And then OptumRx is the 3rd largest pharmacy benefit manager, and they are owned by United Healthcare. and they are just bringing in tons and tons of dollars while pharmacy reimbursements are still continuing to lower. Short staffing is considered a norm in pharmacy, and a recent survey done by Pharmacy Times found that 80% of pharmacists are considering a different career path. With a lot of the negative social media talk and press that has been out there about the pharmacy profession, people are steering clear of going to pharmacy school, and pharmacy school admissions are the lowest they have ever been. In September of 2023, there was also the first walkout to really get national media attention. It happened in Kansas City. There was nearly 24 pharmacists that participated in leaving their CVS and saying that we need better staffing, safer staffing, and more appropriate work conditions for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians. I do want to mention that this did not occur lightly. These pharmacists tried to negotiate with CVS, but were not able to reach any sort of consensus before the dates they had set for the walkout. So when that date came around, they went through with it. Since then, CVS said that they would do better, that they were going to offer overtime and increase their staffing, at least temporarily during the flu and COVID vaccine season, because they said that that was one of the main drivers of the issues in these pharmacies. There are obviously differing opinions on whether or not that is a cause or just one of the other components. So since this has happened, there's been a lot of discussion in the pharmacy networks on the internet about whether this is a one-time thing or if this is going to mean something. But some people have taken this as an opportunity to go further, and there is organization happening right now for a larger walkout at the end of October, so October 30th through November 1st, to try to get not just CVS, but other chains such as Walgreens on board for a walkout to support better and safer staffing for pharmacies. Now, there are a lot of objections and questions about what it would mean for pharmacists to have a larger walkout where hundreds or thousands of pharmacists participated and tried to make a stand. And so I wanted to at least address the questions. I'm not going to pretend that I have all of the answers, but did want to give you some resources for some of those answers that I do believe are out there. The biggest question that any pharmacist asks when it comes to doing something like this is, what is the impact for patients? How is this going to impact patient care? I don't want my patients to go without their medications. And I think this is an extremely valid concern. Pharmacists have always been putting their patients first. That's why pharmacists are in these poor work conditions and continuing to work. Yes, part of it is they want to get paid and they want to feed their families, but a lot of pharmacists still truly care about their patients. So the answer from organizers of these walkouts has been that their goal is not to reduce access for patient medications. Unfortunately, that may happen during these walkouts. However, not all pharmacies are understaffed. So the organizers of the larger walkout are putting together a map of pharmacies that are safely staffed that are going to stay open during the walkout. Additionally, I have heard several people bring up the point that they are doing this for patients. Yes, they're doing it because they want better work conditions, but a lot of it's because they feel like they are in a position that is unsafe for patients and that they cannot safely fill prescriptions and review everybody's information before giving a vaccine to make sure that's appropriate for them. There are a lot of things that go into pharmacy, and they just want to make sure that they can do their jobs safely and accurately. I've also heard people say, well, these walkouts don't matter if not enough people do it, which is definitely true, but they think that this, even if it's a small scale, doesn't matter. Now, the walkout in Kansas City, there were around 24 pharmacists who participated. But one of the things that I found interesting that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is the impact that happened on shares for CVS. So shares for CVS dropped by 2.2% after the Kansas City walkout happened. Now, this was a smaller walkout, so imagine what could happen if there was a larger walkout of hundreds or thousands of pharmacists out there. If this walkout of a small group of people got shareholders' attention, then a larger walkout definitely would. The next question I've heard a lot is also extremely valid, was what about my technicians? How are they going to get paid? So I've seen a lot of different talks about this. Some are saying for technicians to go ahead and go to work if they need to, because the pharmacist can still protest and the point can still be driven across that we need better staffing. And a lot of pharmacists understand what I was mentioning earlier, that many pharmacy technicians are living paycheck to paycheck. However, some pharmacy technicians do still want to participate. So if you know a pharmacy technician who's interested, there is a GoFundMe set up to help cover technician pay. They did help with some of the technicians that were involved in the Kansas City walkout. And then I've also heard from other pharmacists that they're concerned about their own job. They need this job. They have families to feed. They have student loans to pay. And I completely get that. It's an extremely scary thing to put your job on the line, like many of these pharmacists did in Kansas City, to try to make change happen. And so that's a decision that's totally up to you, and it's extremely valid. And then the last thing I want to address is the fact that we as pharmacists do not have a union. So what are the options as far as negotiation, and would a walkout actually result in a positive change in the work environment that is actually lasting? Because is there going to be anybody to hold these organizations accountable for the decisions that are made? There are discussions that are rising even more about unionizing for pharmacy. I don't know where that's going to lead. This has been something that's been talked about for a long time and really hasn't gained a lot of traction in the past. I do think that's a valid concern as far as who's going to hold them accountable. What if this goes south and it happens again, even if there's temporary change? And I think those are all things to consider, and for larger discussions that need to happen before a pharmacy large walkout. There were also discussions of a walkout happening October 9th, 10th, and 11th, which didn't leave a lot of time to get media attention or organize efforts very well. So I think a later walkout also gives time for these organizing groups to discuss with these organizations how they could support safe staffing and what pharmacists actually need and want from them in order for them to feel satisfied and not walk out. I think that's going to be a big hurdle, though, and something to consider when trying to figure out if this is something that you, if you're watching this and you're a pharmacist who works in a community pharmacy and does not feel like you have safe staffing, want to participate in. Overall, I'm curious to see about where these efforts lead from the original walkout to what might happen at the end of October, to see where this leads for the profession, and if there's a possibility for us to head in the right direction to where there are safe working conditions for pharmacists that allow them to fill prescriptions safely for patients and to ensure that accurate and safe medication dispensing is happening, as well as appropriate counseling in time for vaccinations. With that, I hope you learned something or had your interest sparked in something that I said that you might want to go deeper. I have a lot of resources that I'm going to link down in the description or show notes below, depending on where you're watching or listening, so you can check those out at your leisure if you would like. And with that, thank you all for watching or listening. Bye!